Hello, and welcome to the Hearts of Tantra online learning series. Today's class is part 2 of the Liberating Power of Vibration. If you have any questions that come up while you're listening, you can scroll down on your class page to enter your question into the Q&A box. It will be mentioned during the Q&A time. If you are listening over the phone, please feel free to press star 2 during the Q&A period to raise your hand and ask your question. So, without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to internationally known teacher, facilitator, and space creator, Christopher Tompkins.
Wow, internationally known. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you very much for that introduction, and it's wonderful to be with you all again. I may have misheard, but in case I didn't, it's actually the third week for those that are, don't want to mix up the recordings if you're listening after the fact. So I'd like to begin the rest of our sessions together with this fabulous invocation to the goddess of learning, the goddess of knowledge, wisdom, and that is, of course, the one who flows with grace, Saraswati Devi, the goddess Saraswati. And before we do that, which we will continue each week, and we'll be sending or updating the actual Sanskrit of this mantra this week on the Facebook page. Before we do that, I'd like to invoke the resonance, the divine power of the goddess whose bija mantra is represented by the syllable, or whose bija mantra, represents the Krama lineage from which the Spanda tradition comes. For those that are just checking in with us, the Krama lineage, Krama means sequence, the sequence of goddesses, or that is to say, the divine pulsations of consciousness that form the core awareness of our very being. And because of the flow theme that is central to the heart of the Krama life-affirming practice, the practice of yoga, which celebrates the goddess as the immanent power of the divine, which may nonetheless contract through our awareness, should we choose to go there, into places of confinement, of confined, localized consciousness. This is a way of saying getting stuck in our baggage. So when we chant the sacred sound of the core goddess of this tradition, who is Kali, we permeate or break apart all of those stuck nodules or knots of what is literally called gunk in the subtle body, dravya in Sanskrit. And this power of the mantra is one in which is celebrated as a wave-like experience that, whereas thoughts are linear and tend to be compartmentalized, tend to be based in judgment, tend to be focused, tend to be limited expressions of consciousness in this tradition, the sacred sound of the goddess breaks through all of the dravya or gunk that is stored by condensed judgments, thoughts, emotions that have been stored in our body, perhaps not just in this lifetime, but in others. And this mantra is the secret mantra, but it is given to us, a version of it is given to us so that we may access Kali as the immanent power of our divine heart. And this is the mantra, the bija mantra, Shreen, which we might spell S-H-R-E-E-N-G. And if you've been here for the last couple of weeks, you're well aware of the fact that the final syllable, which is final letter rather, which is the final letter of almost all bija mantras, has appeared in our Roman script as the letter M with a dot over it or under it. But this is a sound that is not, in fact, a consonant. It is not made with the lips like the letter M, the consonant. But the M with the dot is really a way of expressing what is just the dot, or bindu in Sanskrit. And this vibration, which we might spell as N-N-N-G, is the highest vowel that could be resonated in the body. And it is described as the sound of honeybees. buzzing through or creating waves of energy that break up the stuck dravya or gunk in our subtle body. And this sound particularly targets the toughest nut to crack, as it were, the toughest granthi or reservoir of this dravya, this gunk. I laugh a little at that, but there's really no better word in English for dravya. And this reservoir is the point just below the third eye. And so before we chant 3 Oms and 3 Shrings, invocating the power of pure consciousness, the ocean of sound, the vibration of Shiva as Om, Shakti in her most omnipresent expression. We'll chant then 3 Shrings, allowing the sound to rise, both of these mantras, from the heart-navel area after a full in-breath with a pause, and feeling the dissolution or the waving away, the waving down of this mantra, both of these at the point between the eyebrows as the sound hum. So 3 rounds of each. Shrim then represents the wave of consciousness that is this particular divine expression called you, called me, this body, this name and form, which, as we know, is a wave, indeed, is a wave of energy. There is nothing solid about a body, just as there's nothing absolutely solid about this existence. This is Spanda. And so invoking these 2 mantras in succession, we open our hearts to the goddess Saraswati for the transmission tonight. And so I invite you to take a comfortable seat and to come into Stiram Sukhamasana, a seat that's not only comfortable but steady, Stiram, and this means that we may wish to prop up the sitting bones, and we begin to attune with the deeper layer of consciousness than normal chitta vritti, the normal whirling of thoughts, which seems so serious and important to pay attention to all the time. But the Tantric tradition teaches us the greatest secret of all is that thoughts have no meaning. And whether we believe this or not, it feels good to let go of chitta vritti. So please join me in taking a nice long lunar breath through the nasal cavity, feeling that current of refreshing air, filling the heart with a pause, and then a gentle sigh, releasing tensions in the body, tensions in the mind, judgments, anxiety. 2 more rounds, drawing deep and long, nice and slowly into the heart with a pause to the place where the mantra rises, Shakti made manifest. Before we take the next breath in, prepare the jaws released, the hands placed in whatever mudra feels grounding to you right now. 3 Oms, celebrating that ocean of consciousness, and then drawing forth the awareness of the goddess of pure bliss experience, the bliss that breaks apart chitta vritti, that breaks apart any anxiety in my body, mind, or heart. Breathing in deep now into the lotus of the heart, we let the mantras fly. Ya kundindu tushara hara dhavala, ya shubra vastavrita, ya vina varadanga mandita kara, ya shweta padmasana, ya brahma chuta shankara prabhitibhir divyai sada vandita, samam patu saraswati bhagavati Vishesha Jadyapaha. We give praise to the Supreme Goddess Saraswati, whose face is as beautiful as a jasmine flower, who is luminescent as the moon, as intricate as a snowflake, and who is dressed in glorious white garments. She holds the veena, the lute, in her hands and bestows boons on her disciples as she sits on her white lotus throne in the heart. We honor beloved Saraswati, who is encircled and worshipped by the gods, that she may bestow blessings upon us. May the goddess remove our ignorance and brighten our life with the light of knowledge. And in this case, the light of the knowledge of Spanda. Om Shrim. Swagatam and welcome everybody. I am honored to have you all with us, even though after all these different sessions we've done online, it seems somewhat strange to not see people, but at the same time, I feel the community worldwide. It's a really special experience for me, as I hope it is for you. And I want to start tonight with a comment, which is something I'm saying quite a lot these days, but I think it can't be repeated enough, which is that we are diving with baby dives, as it were, into the nectar of this tradition. And so it's important to realize that we're not going to get all of these teachings all at once as they're taught. In the same way, I've been diving into the Spandakarikas since, I believe, around 1998, pretty much monthly, if not weekly, if not daily, and I still learn something new every time. So this is a very elaborate and yet simple system at the same time of self-discovery, because what it seeks to do is to unpack the complexity of worldly experience that the mind has created and to draw us into the simple experience of samarasya, that flowing nectarian experience of true self-recognition. So we'll be looking briefly at the end of week 2's handout, but just for a few moments to finish up a section there before we dive into the week 3 handout that was posted a couple of hours ago. So if you'd like, you may wish to open up the week 2 PDF, which should say, I think, just week 2 verses. So we'll have week 2 verses and week 3 verses. And as you're getting that out, if it's not out already, I want to touch upon probably the most famous verse, or actually aphorism, 2 aphorisms, in fact, that the word yoga has ever been found in. And this, of course, as many of you would guess, is the definition of yoga as given by the sage Patanjali in his classical work on yoga called the Yoga Sutra. This text dates to about the 3rd century, and it is, without going into too much detail, if you wish to study that with me, we've actually recorded a teleclass on the Yoga Sutra through the website. But to recap this definition, it was composed sometime in the 3rd or 4th centuries, a few centuries before the Tantric movement began. And its definition is absolutely critical to our understanding and also to our discernment of the huge difference that manifests between the Tantric worldview and that of the classical yogic worldview. And that definition is as follows: Yogas chittavritti nirodha. Yoga is that state that arises when the turnings or whirlings, the circling, you might say, vritti, of chitta has nirodha, that is to say, has dissolved, faded out, has turned into quiescent silence. And this is a state. This is not a practice in this definition. Yoga represents that state of peak experience that everyone has tasted at least once, but probably many times in their lives. Any peak experience or particular high that stands out will have that quality in which the whirling about, or the chattering perhaps is another way to think of it, the chattering of the thoughts in our head moves at least momentarily into a quieter or a sort of faded out state, so that the high of the true self is experienced. And what is that true self? Patanjali continues with Tada drashtuhu swarupe avastanam. When the chitta, when the anxious whirling of the mental world becomes quiescent, becomes silent, or at least more quiet than usual, then the witness, the inner witness, shines forth or stands forth in its true uncovered form. So this word used, witness, is critical to our understanding of what the Spanda teaching is all about. Now, in Patanjali's system, there are two realities, and one is the soul, or the witness. This is the part of us that is permanent. It is pure awareness. And we know this because everything that we can indicate as self, other than our witness self, is impermanent. Whether this is body, mind, emotions, these three aspects of beinghood, beingness, are all fleeting, are impermanent, are constantly recycling with the earth, with the air we breathe, and just like waves on the ocean, they cannot identify the ocean in and of themselves. They are aspects or energy movements. This is Spanda. But there is a witness self. Why? I mean, how do we know this? Because since I was born, I've witnessed the change of this body, and I've followed or beheld, and often perhaps gotten tangled in, the flowing or circling energy of thoughts and emotions. So we know that there's a witness, and this is all that we can identify as a permanent self. The other side of the coin for Patanjali now is what he calls Prakriti, and this is the world out there, materiality, which is also in flux. By this we mean the physical world, which is not so solid if we look under an electron microscope. Everything is energy fluctuations. But by Prakriti, or materiality, Patanjali also means anything that we behold with our witness self. So this does include, in fact, the body and thoughts and emotions. So to be very succinct, very clear, anything that moves that you behold with your inner eye, with your inner self, not necessarily with the senses, but with the inner witness that can watch thoughts, that is aware of emotions before we get entangled in them. This self is one half, the other half is Prakriti, objectivity. Now, what the Tantrics do that blows this wide open is, of course, if Shakti is the immanence of consciousness, that this is all that there is, this universe, this particular planet, this particular body that I am experiencing as self, as Christopher, fill your name in the blank, is an expression of Shakti, just as the whole universe is made up of waves of Shakti on the one ocean of consciousness. So that means that there is a direct rebuttal or rejection of Patanjali's system, which says, no, there's just the soul and material reality, and we have to extract the soul from the body in order to be liberated. Here, the shift is one of grounding awareness in the most expansive place it can go, which is the ocean of consciousness itself. So if we take a look at week 2's handout, we were basically just touching on, towards I think the last hour of the class, the three states of what is called experiential awareness. What are the three states or three targets that our awareness can alight upon? And this is a critical teaching. These are three locations in which we place our awareness, in which our witness self projects or becomes focused upon. Now, on pages 5 through 7 or so of last week's handout, we have these pretty pictures of waves. The waves rising, this is Shrishti, or creation. the peak of a wave or any experience, any thought, a life, sthiti, and then the dissolution or samhara of the wave back into the ocean. But if you take a look at the bottom of page 6, not that you have to if you don't have that handout available, because there's not much on it but a picture, but it is taught in this tradition that our true highest self, the Shiva consciousness that we are at our fundamental ground level of existence, is obscured or concealed to us, vilaya in Sanskrit. Why? Because our awareness is focused almost entirely on objectivity. That is to say, speaking internally now, on our thoughts and emotions. As we go about our day and we concentrate on where awareness is projecting, we will find that it is almost entirely analyzing thoughts and emotions, judging thoughts and emotions, spurring up or churning up out of the ocean of awareness even more thoughts and emotions. This is called chitta vritti, the churning of anxious thinking, represented by these crazy crashing waves on page 6. So that's objectivity, and this is a simple 101, Tantra 101 lesson, of course, so obvious, that is true. I find it kind of interesting that we often think of someone who might have schizophrenia as a crazy person because they're talking to themselves. I lived in Berkeley, California for 7 years, and there's plenty of these people all over Telegraph Avenue, and perhaps we walk by and feel a little sad that they're talking to someone who's not there, and that must be a tough state. Well, Eckhart Tolle, perhaps a modern tantric master who wrote The Great Power of Now, the book is called The Power of Now, which is great, says the only difference between a person that's not schizophrenic and a schizophrenic person is that the schizophrenic person does all their talking to themselves on the outside, whereas we, as non-schizophrenics, do exactly the same thing, and so we have an inherent schizophrenia. That is to say, we so identify with thoughts and emotions that we constantly create more of it, create as if it were a limited sense of self. And is it limiting? Well, just a little bit of self-reflection can tell us that. All we need to do is to meditate on what it felt like to be high in our last or in any memorable peak experience. And as I already mentioned, the common factor of all highs, no matter what your high is versus my high, no matter what triggered your high versus someone else's, the common experience is that the noise of the mind fades into quiescence. And what happens? The second phase on page 7 that is given to us is, and this is not given very clearly in Patanjali, or at least certainly not defined as a state in which one can become empowered, and that is the second state. That the first is called prameya, which means the objective world of thoughts and emotions. The second place, our witness, our inner self, can place its awareness is on the act of perception itself. That is to say, pramana, which means perceptual experience. Quite simply put, just as we see these waves above us now on page 7, we are a little bit deeper into the sea or the ocean of consciousness, and we can watch our thoughts and watch how the energy of our awareness moves towards them. But everyone on this phone call or listening to these recordings has had moments, perhaps today, where thoughts were churning back and forth or circling in the head, and we simply watched our awareness go to them and allowed it to dissipate before we judged them. That is to say, if you have ever been aware of your thoughts and emotions, but chose not to give them energy, chose to say, you know what, I'm just going to enjoy this sip of tea instead of worrying about that issue that's running through my head. That is pramana consciousness. This is the beginning of the revelation of one's highest consciousness, or Shiva, because we're beginning to realize or to withdraw from, in self-realization, contracted awareness that's stuck in the violent storms of thoughts and emotions. And I say violent because they do get violent. Now, the third state that is given to us is that which is called the subjective self, the experience of pure self-identity, which does not have any condition at all. This is pramater on page 8, letter C. Pramater is the beginning of immersion into Shivahood, where our awareness expands. We have withdrawn through simple mindfulness. We've withdrawn our psychic energy, our mental energy away from thoughts and emotions, become aware of the act of perception. This is exactly what we mean when we say, I'm not going to go there in my head. That means I'm aware that there's thoughts that are sort of compelling me, that are drawing me forth to judge them, to engage with them, and I'm not going there. That's pramana. And when that leads to an even deeper sense of peace, and there's just pure awe left, there's just pure self without another, without a second, without any object. These are experiences of supreme high. This is called pramater. And we say the subjective self. This does not mean the self that has subjective awareness that's particular to me. It simply means the self which is pure witness, which is pure Satchit Ananda, being, consciousness, and bliss. So moving from this, I'd like to take just a few minutes before we dive into week 2 to look at some of the reflections that have come in about the I guess you'd call it the homework post that I put on Facebook, which is simply asking the question, have I experienced, can I recall an experience of pramater? And moreover, where is my consciousness placed? What is it like to experience the sequence or the flow from pure entanglement in chitta-vritti, which is prameya consciousness, to flow to a more transcendent level below the ocean surface, below the surface of my own awareness, to pramana, and to finally allow that to dissolve into pure being, pure pramater. And for those that are wondering about the rest of Handout 2, this is more or less supplemental. We'll be coming back to the 5 functions of Shiva on page 9 in the breath cycle when we get to Tantric Yoga. But this is perhaps a chart that you may wish to look at on your own, namely how the 5 states of consciousness of Lord Shiva are experienced in the breath cycle. And we'll get more into this in a couple of weeks. And again, this is said at the beginning, but if you have any questions or comments or reflections, please type them in as we go along. That way, when I come to the pause for Q&A, they'll be ready. So, one respondent wrote in reflecting on peak highs, they really have been pramater experiences for sure. The interesting part, though, is that I appear to be more comfortable in the prameya and pramana states. That is to say, in the states of identifying with thoughts and emotions, prameya, and pramana, watching my energy go towards that. In other words, she says, or he says, as awesome as the pramater experience is at the time, once it is over, my analytical mind takes over and starts to analyze and at times even undermine my subjective awareness experience. And because I was in a state of pramater, pure witness awareness, it was liberating at the time, but a bit terrifying afterwards. End quote. I thought that was just a beautiful testimony and so clear in the sense that this is really what happens in terms of pramater experience, is that we step into a place that the egoic mind is afraid to go. And the very short answer to this is that if the ego is that function which needs to protect a self or to create a self, to become better, to become more in order to feel free, it by definition is threatened by the very idea that there's a part of us that is free already. And so there is a certain schizophrenia in all human beings in the sense that there's an ego voice which chatters all day long, is constantly problem solving and grasping for happiness in the future. And that one source, the Pramatra, which is happiness itself, because it is the ocean of Shiva. And then, of course, we can ask, well, how did this happen? You know, we can go off on a billion psychoanalytical tangents. The question is this true? And if we reflect on how our awareness works, we have to say yes. Another respondent wrote, in terms of experiencing Pramatra, and this is just absolutely lovely, and this mother decided, quote, that my most important task in motherhood is to recognize that my kids aren't my kids, and therefore not people whom I can mold as I please, but precious souls whom I have been allowed to take care of, love, and support in every way, enabling them to shine just as they are, loving them just as they are, and not for what I want them to be. These truly magical moments when everything just flows really stand out. They take my breath away and fill me with such a condensed feeling of love. That state, I believe, is Pramatra. It only lasts for a short period and immediately dissolves into Pramana when the experience is judged as divine, good, or utterly beautiful. Or the thought, wow, I love this child, arises. And then straight back into Prameya, objective consciousness, in order to get dinner on the table, or whatever makes daily life work. So these responses are very, very wonderful, and they're simple and yet profound experiences for these people and for all of us if we reflect on what it means to step into, or literally to plunge into, often without our own volition. It just happens into this deep oceanic state of Pramatra where there's nothing but what is. And what is being, which has as its quality presence, consciousness that is expanded, and the bliss of not having to do anything in order to feel pure joy. But the second respondent gives us a great sort of flowing sequence. She's in Pramatra when she's not attached and just beholds the beauty of the love for her children. And then it flows into Pramana and into Prameya. Well, we have to work on the level of Prameya. This is not a tradition that's about getting rid of thinking. It's about one that seeks to identify us through yoga with Pramatra, with that core Shiva state, so that we can realize the whole ocean is nothing but bliss, and that thoughts are waves of Shakti, and they are not meant to beat us up, but rather they are just expressions of embodiment. And so one can come back into Prameya after tasting that nectar and no longer be dashed about on the rocks, on the shores of the ocean of the mind, the tide of life coming in and out. No, there's only the ocean of consciousness. So this is called Jivan Mukti, liberated while alive, liberated from suffering when we engage the mind stuff of Prameya. Beautiful. Okay, now we'll take a look here at the week 3 verses, and I want to make one more comment, and then we'll break to see, just for a minute, to see if there's any responses or questions. Last week, you also received a handout we looked at called the 12 Kalis, and I'm not going to ask you to open that, but just to make a mental note, I added that handout because it is referred to, the system of 12 Kalis, by Kshamaraja. This is the practice of the Krama lineage. Simply put, there are 4 Kalis, or expressions of the one mother, for each of the 3 states. There are 4 Kalis for Prameya, objectivity. The first gives rise to a thought. The second Kali sustains the thought. The third dissolves it. And the fourth is she who churns the waves. And so the second set of Kalis are responsible for the rising, the sustainment, and the dissolution of watching thoughts. Not engaging, but pramana. That is to say, of feeling that energy coming out of us that wants to draw towards thoughts and engage them and chatter all day long and get immersed into these contracted senses of self-identity. But the sustainment here is the Kali who says no. no, I'm going to sit as the watcher, and then the third Kali dissolves that function back into pure peace. Pramana shifts into Pramatar, as you'll see it on that handout if you go back to it. And it's beautiful because then you have 4 more Kalis that represent the cycle of absolutely dissolving into pure self-acceptance until there's nothing but self, and you realize this is who I am. I am this ocean. And then even that I am dissolves into pure Shiva. So we'll be unpacking that beautiful sequence of the 12 Kalis in future classes on the Krama. But it's simply a very ornate way of describing the different movements of becoming or stepping into your own enlightened state. So with a handout, or rather week 3 verses before us, the handout for that, I'll pause and ask if there are any questions, comments, concerns, or reflections.
Yes, and if you have any questions, remember if you're on the phone, go ahead and click, I know I've said this, but *2, and that will raise your hand so you can actually ask it live on the call. So just if you have any questions on the phone, go ahead and do it that way, or any, thoughts or reflections.
So we're clear right now?
We are clear. No questions
okay.
Right now.
Don't be shy. We love reflections and all that. And we'll come back to see if there are any towards the end. So these next few verses, and you'll notice we got to verse 5, and the reason is, there's several reasons for that, even though we're scheduled to do 8 verses. And one is that I really wanted to spend some time on the 3 states of awareness, and we'll see how this ties into where the text is going. The 3 states of awareness, Prameya, Pramana, and Pramatar, we'll find in this tradition are analogized also to states of consciousness in terms of sleeping and wakefulness, and we'll see this in just a moment, and I think that'll make the teaching even more clear and accessible. So, our second verse, we spent all that time on one verse, and I only gave you like maybe 20% of what Kshemaraja delights in with this first verse, the juice, the rasa, the nectar of his enlightened state pouring forth as these luminous reflections on this all-powerful first Spandakarika, on the dance of the cycles of Shakti that pour forth out of the ocean of Shiva that we spent a week and a half on. Now we move into a deeper exploration in what it means to identify with supreme consciousness. And we begin with Spandakarika, verse 2, on page 1 of our handout for this week. Yatra stitam midam sarvam karyam yasmaschat nirgatam tasyanavrita rupatwan nanirodosti kudra chit. That supreme consciousness out of which the entire objective universe arises, within which it is sustained, is never suppressed at any time or place, because its very nature is non-concealment, literally. Supreme consciousness, out of which all of this reality is sustained, and out of which all of this reality has arisen, which we've already seen. Everything that can be thought of, experienced, witnessed through the 5 senses of this body is in a cycle of becoming, of shrishti, birth, sthiti, maturity, samhara, dissolution. Just as the wave rolls forth as these phases and dissolves back into the ocean. Everything. Now, we've seen this already. But the verse goes on and says, this consciousness is never absent, is never literally nirodha, and this is this term we've seen in other contexts. Nirodha means suppression or dissolution. So it never dissolves or fades away or can be concealed at any time. Why? Well, the verse says somewhat cryptically, because its very nature is anavrita, tasya navrita rupatvan. Its very nature is non-concealment. It is all that there is. And this is a concept. See, I can't even dare say concept. Concepts are within the ocean of consciousness. You can't even talk about this. And so we're really referring to poetry that points to the experience of pure bliss that is without descriptive possibility. And yet, Kshemarajah will sing to us the pointers that help to reveal this truth. How is it that supreme consciousness is present all the time when I seem to experience separation? I seem to experience through my senses differences. I seem to experience when I'm in pain emotionally or mentally anything but Satchit Ananda, that definition of Shiva, being consciousness and bliss. And yet the verse tells me that this supreme awareness, this consciousness, which is all that there is a part of all experiences, even the yucky thoughts that I might have. And therefore, even those are divine. How can this be? Kshemarajah opens his heart to us. And I'll occasionally, I think tonight, the whole time, given the length of what we're covering, be reciting, upon popular request or common request, the Sanskrit of Kshemarajah before we hear what he has to say in English. So the first quote under the verse here is this first piece of Sanskrit. So what is this verse saying? This verse is talking about Shankara. Tasyasya Shankaratmanaha Prakashananda Ghanasya Swaswabhavasya Nakutra Chiddeshe Kala Akaleva Nirodha Prasara Vyagatosti Anavrita Rupatvad Astagita Swabhavavat. Swabhavatvat. This verse is talking about Shiva, Shankara, whose own true essence is that of the source light, Prakasha, source light of the universe, consisting of what? Of an intense mass of bliss. That is, and now he's quoting the verse, that is never suppressed at any time or place, unquote. Meaning, within our experience of time and space. This intense mass of bliss, the source light, is all that there is, even here in the workaday world of time and space, meaning to say of phenomenality, of experience. And he goes on, the term, quote, suppression, nirodha, unquote, indicates that it is impossible to conceal Shiva, whose very nature is unconcealable, meaning to say that his true essence is omnipresent. Ayam bhava iha yat kim prana toyashtika sukha niladikam chitprakasha syarvakam sambhavyate tadyadina prakashate na kinchit prakasha manam tu prakashatmaka Shankaram Swarupameveti Kim Kasya Nirodakam Kova Nirodartaha. Now, Kshemarajah tells us, if the source light of consciousness could be concealed, well, then there'd be no illumination, and darkness would obscure everything that exists, including one's own vital force, prana, the 8 constituents of embodiment, which are namely, this is my brackets here, ego, the sense of I am. Literally, ego in Sanskrit is ahamkara, I maker. My intellect, meaning to say, buddhi in Sanskrit, the part of me that judges and analyzes prameya, the objective world. The third constituent is simple instinctual mental function, fight or flight, basic mental awareness, not, cognitive thinking and planning, just base mental function. And then The last 5 of the 8 are the 5 senses, the activity of the 5 senses. This is said to be what comprises the subtle body. These are the constituents that keep us in time-bound awareness. Our senses, our ego, the intellect that judges what we see through our senses, and our basic, motor mental function. Okay, back to Kshemarajya. So, if the source light of consciousness could be concealed, there'd be no illumination, there'd be no light, and darkness would obscure everything that exists, including the vital force, the 8 constituents of embodiment, and consequently the joy of perceiving the colors of the objective world, such as blue and so on. The very nature of Shankara is this source light. How can this be concealed? He says, and what I love here, and this is classic Kshemarajya, he loves these rhetorical questions. He says, here's the point of the verse. As Shiva, as he is all that there is, who would be the concealer? If the source light, Prakasha, is all that there is, just as the sun illuminates that which we see, just as the sun is responsible for all of life, and nothing in the universe can exist without the source light. Nothing on this planet can exist without light, and therefore we are projections of light, of the sun. The elements of our body, we now know from cosmology, come from the sun, are literally part of the Big Bang, part of the essence of the sun. So in the same way, as Shiva is the source light, who would be the concealer? Now, what this is pointing to is the fact that when we say, I feel contracted, I feel that the true divine nature that I perhaps believe is within me or is all around me, it seems concealed. And the verse is saying it is not. It is not. It is not concealed. For who would be the concealer when all there is light, the source light? If we perceive anything, such as our thoughts, our prana, our senses, and then beyond that, the world out there, then that means Shiva is present. This is a critical teaching. So that, and I describe under the notes, the Puryashtika, this is that term for the 8 constituents. So in this case, when he's talking about Pramathar in the vital force, prana is Shakti. It's the very essence of witness consciousness that circulates throughout our body, doing its various functions, but it is the energy of that source consciousness, Shiva. So where do I discover Pramathar, pure bliss consciousness? The access point is my vital force, is attuning that vital force with the still points in my awareness, Pramathar. Pramana here is the 8 constituents of the body. When my awareness is simply aware of my own ego, I am aware of my mind discursively judging things. I'm aware of my basic mental motor function of fight or flight instinct, and I'm aware of my senses shooting and firing off and engaging with the world. This is pramana. So to engage in pramana, we begin to just barely, just slightly taste the nectar of Pramathar and realize nothing can be ultimately gained that is permanent by flowing out all the time towards the world of thoughts and objectivity. And Prameya is that objectivity, letter C here, and that's the example is the color blue. That's an object. I see blue in the sky is an object. So awareness can move in these 3 phases, and yet Shiva is equally present in all. Shiva is the Pramathar of the entire ocean. The Pramana, the gentle undulation underneath the waves of Prameya, which is the surface of consciousness, the surface of my mind. So he quotes this very, very influential, very short tantra of the so-called lineage of Tantra, known as the Trika, the triad of goddesses, called the Para Trimshika, the 30 verses on the Supreme Goddess. Verse 24, which is as follows. Just as the potent energy of the great banyan tree is latent in a tiny seed, so the entire universe, comprised of moving and non-moving entities, is latent within the seed of the heart. Spanda. Spanda is the quivering throb of that mass of bliss consciousness that settles as Kundalini Shakti in the pause between breaths, the gap between thoughts, the seed which springs forth my inner universe of perception and objectivity. So what we are after is attunement with this heart seed. And once this is discovered, we become that heart seed, and the tree is simply beautiful, the tree of my consciousness. Beautiful verse. And even if that wasn't enough, and this is where we get into some of the pure rasa of Shea Maharaja's commentary, the pure nectar. He often quotes his teacher, well, let me get this straight, okay. His teacher, Abhinavagupta's teacher's teacher. In other words, his great-grand teacher, Sri Utpaladeva, the legendary sage of Kashmiri Shaivism, who wrote the stanzas on recognizing the Lord within oneself. This dude was so blissed out that in his famous poem called The Garland of Praise for Lord Shiva, the Shiva Strotabali, he can't even finish a verse towards the end of this poem. He's so immersed in the bliss of Spanda pouring through his body as he's trying to compose it that he breaks his train of thought, because Prameya is washed out by Pramatar as he's writing Upaladeva. And he just finishes, although metrically perfect, with Jayati, Jayati, Jaya, 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 Jaya. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It falls apart. And then I think it's a chapter in that particular hymn. So here's a quote from Utpaladeva that Shea Maharaja adds to this theme. Palameshwarata Jayat Ya Purvata va Sarvesha Yadishita Vyashunya Aparapi Tataivete Yayedam Jagarabati Yatatata Babati. O Lord of the universe, praise be to you, whose unprecedented supreme lordship has nothing to rule over. For there is nothing other than you. For without your light, there would be no universe to illuminate. Well, folks, that's some good old-time religion there. That's Sri Upaladeva. So, as is common in these texts, the Spandakarikas, or its traditional author, Kalata, doesn't assume you get it with that one verse. That is to say, how could Shiva be equally present in all states of my awareness, even in my Chittavritti, just as Shiva is present in peak experiences when Chittavritti phases out? And the answer unflowers further in Spandakarika 3 on page 3. Jagradadi viverepi dharabine prasarpati nivartate nijanaiva swabhavarupalabdritaha. Even when divisions appear, when we are in the waking and dream states, that supreme consciousness does not change. It never desists from its inherent nature, which is universally present subjective witness. It never desists, even in the waking and dream states. Now, the waking and dream states. Let's start there. Here we have, simply as I preluded earlier, a different way of looking at Prameya, first of all, which is the waking state. When we are awake, we perceive objects, and our awareness tends to go towards the world out there that is experienced through our senses, to the sounds we hear, the sights we see, the smells we smell, etc. And what this means is when our senses are firing, we perceive through those five senses subjects and objects. There is an I, a subject, that experiences that experiences that shape, that experiences this body as a physical thing that I see and I can touch, that experiences anything through the senses objectively. And so we call this experience of duality. And while certainly this tradition honors all states of perception as equally divine, it nonetheless acknowledges that this is the most painful or most painfully potential focus we can have, because it creates the illusion of separation, that I am separate from the universe, that I am this little ego with a body that must desperately create a world of stuff to identify, to authoritize who I am, to make myself permanent, identity, accomplishments, objects, possessions, people that are mine, etc., etc. Remember in that lovely testimony of the mother speaking of her children, she said specifically, the pramatra, the bliss state came when I realized these are not children that I own. They are beings that I'm blessed with, and I perceive them as pure bliss balls that are not necessarily objects that are my possession, even though I say my children. So she's in that state in which spanda is flowing freely in that pramatra. Whereas, and this, of course, tells us the clue that you can experience pramatra when you're in the waking state. That is to say, pure unity consciousness that's not possessing anything, that simply beholds energy awareness. But most of us in the world, most of the time, experience what is called, and I'm going to keep saying it, chitta vritti, anxious cycling of awareness. And this anxiety comes from one thing, and that is from the false belief that there is separation. Just as if you imagine yourself as a wave and you see other waves that are different from you, those waves are separate, and I must protect my wave, identify my wave. I must seek to possess other waves, perhaps, when the ocean itself can possess nothing, for it's all that there is from the wave's point of view. So that's the waking state. Now, in the dream state, when we're asleep and dreaming, it seems to be the same case. I dream adventures. I had one last night. It was a hell of an adventure. If I were to go into it, you'd be floored by how insane it was. I had lots of characters running around. I was one of them. And it seemed as real as this waking state, as this world around me when I'm awake and going throughout my day, while I was dreaming it. And yet, the fact of the matter is that when we dream these adventures, in which we are often actors, there's only one dreamer. And that whole objective reality of opposites, of characters, of drama that we see in our dream is pouring forth out of the one dreamer. That's you, your source awareness. Just as the movie projector projects through the light of the movie, of the actual camera, the movie onto the screen, so it is that we project a reality like this in our sleep. So we can actually think about it this way. The movie on the screen is waking consciousness. It's prameya, objective reality. But all of that comes from the one light source of Shiva. This is pramana. Pramana is the experience of dreaming, where we become aware, at least when we wake up and reflect upon our dream, that we were projecting or perceiving a created reality. And what becomes interesting is that I'm creating this dream, not the dream itself. This is the waking state. The dream state. And supreme consciousness does not change in either. It never desists from its inherent nature, that of the universally present subjective witness. This came up in a beautiful way in the life experience of Paramahamsa Yogananda, who if you read an autobiography of a yogi, as a young man, he was really beginning to have these incredible experiences of pure pramata, in which he, in fact, describes identifying the source light of the universe as Divine Mother, the Prakasha, the energy of Shiva, and wonderfully amazed by this power and utterly blissed out of his mind, he goes walking down the street and sees everyone, experiences everyone as vibrations of one flowing consciousness. And he decides to check out something that was novel at the time, and this was in around 1918, during the First World War. And the novel thing was something called cinema, which had never been in India before and had just gotten over to India. And he walks into the first movie house, presumably, that was ever established in Calcutta. And inside he saw something quite amazing, particularly in the state of awareness he was in. And that was the first time he saw a movie. Can you imagine? What would that be like? We're used to them. But the first time anyone's ever seen a film. I'm told that when the first film was played in France, it was of a train shooting out of a tunnel towards the crowd, and everyone ran out in terror out of the theater because they thought the train was coming at them. Similarly, Yogananda walks into this theater and sees several things. He sees first the movie, and it was a horror movie, some cheesy Wolfman type thing, I think imported from Europe or the U.S., and, some guy dressed up in tacky makeup or whatever, in costume, chasing a heroine on the screen. And everyone, he writes, was horrified, as if it was real. I mean, shrunk in their seats and in terror, some of them running out of the room. And he thought, how odd, they think that's real. And then he said, the next thing was the light, one source light projecting the images on the screen of yum and yuck, positive and negative, horrible and delightful, good and bad, happy and sad, this and that, right? He says they're afraid of light, is what it comes down to. And there was only one character in the whole theater who was not in terror, and that was the projectionist. He said, well, how come he's not afraid of the film? And the answer is, of course, the analogy is that the projectionist is the yogi, who recognizes that the drama of life, and in fact, what appears as divisions, what appears as a series of differences, the dream movie of Pramea, the objective world, is really projected from the source light of Shiva. And so Shiva is inherent in, well, I don't say movie camera, but in the source sun that projects the light, the beams of light themselves, and the light's target as well. That is to say, objects. Kshamaraja tells us, Loka prasiddhe jagrat swapna shashutanam vede yogi prasidheipi vadharana dhyana samadhi rupe prasarpati anyanya rupe pravahati sati artat tatvam nijadana payanya sarvasyatma bhuchachanu bhavatar Rupat Swabhavan Nava Nivartade. As for the different states of awareness mentioned in this verse, verse 3, including waking consciousness, the dream state, and deep dreamless sleep, which are common experiences for ordinary people, and which correspond to the states for yogis known as dharana, concentration, meditation, dhyana, and absorption. These different states are known to proceed, quote unquote, or to flow from one to the next. Let's pause there. We talked about waking consciousness, the dream state. What happens in deep dreamless sleep? If in waking consciousness our awareness is projected on pramea, that is to say, objective reality, in the dream state, we become aware of the act of perception, the light that creates the movie, the act of dreaming that creates the dream. Then in deep dreamless sleep, which we know from Cogsci, studies of sleep stages, we can get into. This is called very healing and yet uncommon stages of sleep, where there's no dream. If there is no dream, and we can test this by putting all sorts of gadgets and so forth on the people sleeping now, right? We can know that some people are sleeping without dreams. So what's happening? There is nothing but pure pramāta, pure witness. There is no activity beyond witness consciousness. There's no dream being projected, and the person's not awake, so they're not firing through the senses and interacting with objective reality. So even though they're asleep, there's just pure oceanic pramāta, pure subjectivity. So these are common for ordinary people. That's what he means, the stages of sleep. Whereas yogis, the understanding is that in dharana, when we concentrate, we're aware of objective reality, pramāta, but we concentrate on one object. That's the prameya. The act of meditation, dhyana, is where we begin to focus on the flow of energy from the witness to the object, which might be a candle flame, a mantra that we utter, perhaps the breath. And then finally, we're absorbed into the very source that's projecting towards the object, samadhi. Samadhi then is pramāta. So for yogis, this is what the three states are. And all of these do, as he says, flow from one to the next. Now let's jump back in. He says, in reality, that which has arisen as the integral self of all that there is, Shiva, the experiencer of every state of awareness, is he who thus never desists. So, that light is present in all states of awareness, all states of experience. Why is this important to us? It's important because when we are caught up in prameya, in the world of pure objective thinking, in the entanglement of the dramas of our minds that tell us that we must fix, acquire, and become, that tell us it's not yet quite the right time to be happy because something has to be done. That voice will also tell us, or is telling us, that we cannot experience what we are because something has to be done. The verse says, Kshemarāja affirms, the experiencer is always there. Know that this voice is not clear. Just as waves obscure the ocean but are a part of the ocean, so it is that the waves of thought do not give us a clear picture of who we are. So the suggestion subtly here is to dive deeper than your mind for self-identity. Dive deeper through your yoga. Dive deeper through whatever triggers that source consciousness for you in your practice. I inserted Shiva Sutra 1.7. Some of you have studied this text with other teachers, I believe, which gives us this teaching, and I won't unpack it further, but the Lord arises as the enjoyer. And here, this is the fourth state of consciousness, which has become subdivided into the states of dreamless sleep, pramāta, dream states, pramāna, and wakefulness, which is prameya. What is the fourth state? It is the state in which suddenly we've moved from pure, quiescent, non-entangled self-bliss awareness and have expanded beyond even that, beyond the last residue of ego, and suddenly we become one with the whole world of perception, all three of the other states. In other words, we identify with the ocean as one bliss flow, surging back and forth with nothing to do but to be high. What contracts us so that this is lost to us? One of my favorite verses, verse 4. This is Karika 4, stanza 4. Sometimes I joke this is the Spanda Karika's attempt at comedy, or Kalata's attempt at comedy, because the way the Sanskrit's rendered is kind of dramatically funny, but it's pretty serious. And it refers to what happens when we attach to concepts or self-judgments. Aham sukhi cha dukhi cha raktascha ityadi samvidaha sukha dyavastanushate Vartante yantra taspurgam. When concepts such as, quote, I'm a happy person, or, quote, I'm a sorrowful person, or I am attached arise, it is evident that they are other than the witness self and exist as a garland of thought constructs strung together that consists of happiness, quote unquote, and the other conceptual states. Now, what kind of concepts are these when we say, I am a happy person? And how is it these are not part of the self? Well, what the verse directly means, and will be unpacked for us, is that these are states of awareness that are triggered by experiences or conditioned states. I am happy because is the implication. And so these are thought blossoms. They pop up all day long. I feel happy. I feel sad. I am attached. I am clinging, which is another way of the text saying I'm not a good person. I'm weak. Raktascha. I'm a weak person. These are self-judgments. But these are not the self. That is to say, they do not in and of themselves identify your highest self. And therefore, if we become attached or engrossed in these temporary states of I am happy because I have this possession, this status, this relationship, or I am sad because I have this person or don't have this person, this goal met, this object in my life. Or simply, I suck, which is what is meant by I'm attached. I'm just a bad person. When these arise, it is clear through just a little bit of mindfulness that they cannot be the self. And why is that? Because they are strung together. This is a poetic way of saying they are chitta-vritti. Thoughts string together, just as waves. One wave gives rise to another, so one thought is strung to the next thought in an endless sequence of conceptual states. Go beyond that. When the thought arises, I am a happy person because, what if we were to say, I am a happy person no matter what, because my core is happy, or I'm a sorrowful person because of blank. I just am, even though there's sorrow flowing through me. Kshemaraja. Those concepts, such as I am happy and the rest, are, quote, strung together, which means, or that is to say, the states such as happy and the rest of them clearly arise as if sewn together in the subtle world of cognition that we witness subjectively. The witness can watch these thoughts arise and fall and cycle through. And thus, he says, they are not the same as the witness self. That is to say, they cannot encapsulate the witness self, the pure bliss self. They cannot define who you are. And the time has come, according to this teaching, for us to grow up, for us to actually evolve out of the quasi-animal state that has us identify with our thoughts, that I am what I feel, instead of I am and I feel. I am and I feel happy, sad, good, bad, yum, and yuck. This is the beginning of withdrawing into the core spun of the heart so we can spring forth with a new awakened awareness that experiences these constructs as simply rays of bliss in our awareness, instead of concepts that knock us off kilter, create zones of depression, undo our life, create obsessive compulsiveness. This is called grasping at the wave instead of identifying with the ocean. He continues, it is evident, quote unquote, means, from the verse, means that this truth is commonly experienced by all beings. That is to say, all beings, even non-yogis, can become aware that I am witnessing these concepts come through my head, these judgments. I am happy and sad because of stuff, and need not become it. those concepts that arise, that is to say, that manifest and are experienced in us, are not the same or cannot encapsulate Shiva, Shankara. Why? Because his own true nature is a mass of bliss consciousness. Chirananda Gane Shankaratmani Swaswabhave Iti Na Sarvada Sukadya Upaditir Askritoyam Matmapi Tuchinmaya. Therefore, this self with a capital S, the self of all beings, is never sullied, tarnished by the temporary conditioned states of pleasure, pain, and so on. Why? Because it is pure consciousness alone. So to be perfectly clear, neither the verse nor Kshemaraja is saying that we should suppress thoughts, that we should disidentify with them. The lesson here simply is that we are much more than them. And when we identify with the bigger sense of self, then the conditioned waves of our mind don't beat us up anymore. We see them for what they are. For to be in a body means to experience highs and lows, sorrows and joys, pain and pleasure. But underneath that, the yogi identifies with that which does not change, pure bliss consciousness of the self. He goes on a bit further. That state of mind expressed in such statements as, quote, I am happy, I am miserable, I'm too fat, I'm too skinny, quote unquote. He adds a couple more for our amusement. Is the deluded state. That state of mind is the deluded understanding of the self that arises from attaching to embodied experiences such as temporary pleasures and so on. As a consequence of this realization, when we realize this, when we realize I absolutely want to experience my senses and the pleasures of life, but when I begin to cling to them for a sense of self, as a consequence of realizing this, by allowing one's awareness to flow from the bodily container, which is directed only towards outer experiences, one immerses into the inner realm where the true self is recognized to be identical with Shiva. As a consequence of realizing I have over-identified with the temporary states that my body experiences, the highs and lows of life, I choose to turn my awareness into that pure quiescent pause in the heart, into my daily yoga practice, which draws me into that space. Then I gradually, or for some of us, suddenly trigger forth the true self, which is identical with Shiva. So we'll go through verse 5, and then with a few minutes to go, see if you have some feedback and questions. And if not, we can hash it around and go a little deeper on the Facebook page this week. Let's all take a breath in for a moment, since this is, I almost said heady material, and it seems that way, but it's actually not. What's heady is prameya. What's heavy is the ego, which likes complexity. And this text in Kshemaraja is approaching this head-on, dealing with the way the ego works to simplify, to break apart, to ease us into a place of pramata, being, consciousness, and bliss. So let's take a breath in and release a nice sigh that we don't have to grasp everything at once here, because Spanda is to be experienced, not analyzed. Verse 5, Karika 5. Na dukam na sukam yatra, na grahyam grahakam nacha, nachasti buddha bhavopi tarasti paramartata. When the highest state is experienced, the elusive states of awareness do not exist. The highest state wherein there is no pleasure nor pain, as there is no subject nor object. And of course, this means temporary triggered pleasures and pains, by believing that there is a world out there separate from the world in here. This is the state of the yogi immersed in spanda, immersed in the light of bliss consciousness, immersed in the ocean of awareness. The deluded states that occur when we identify only with the surface, with chitta-vritti, with the waves, vanishes. Kshamaraja. Atta cha yasmin asmin sopadesha sadhadhanam maha anubhava parishilye spurata sare spandatatve spurati dukkha sukha graha grahaka dhabhavadikamidam sarapi natim shateva sarvasyai tach chamatkaraika saratvat tari vaitaras diti upadishtam yanmaha gurava. For the noble one, this is you, folks, who attentively follows this teaching, the reality of spanda, of pulsation, whose essence is the light of throbbing, streaming, blissful consciousness, becomes clearly manifest to them. Consequently, whether or not the experiences of pain, pleasure, subjects, and objects are present, whether or not these experiences are present, these experiences are considered by the Noble One to amount to nothing. Why? Because all of reality appears to her, to the Noble One, as the quintessence of the utter delight that is spanda. So has taught, so has said one of our venerable teachers. And now he quotes, unquote, Kshamaraja. And now he quotes our pal, the great blissed out master, Utpaladeva, for the final time tonight. I have lost the Sanskrit for this. Oh, we've got to hear the Sanskrit. Bear with me 1 second. It's right here. See, there's got to be little faux pas now and then. A little bit of prameya and pramana consciousness. So Utpaladeva, who wrote the stanzas on the recognition of the Lord, this text has not been translated, but Utpaladeva's various works are now starting to come out. So we're in a great space to actually go deeper and even further back than the Spanda, or rather than Kshamaraja's lineage, and to learn what it is like to experience the first wave of the Spanda teaching through the heart and eyes and mind of Utpala. So we'll be working on that soon too. Okay, the verse that's quoted is Dukanyapi sukayante vishamapyamritayate mokshayate cha samsaro yatra marga sashankaraha yatra marga sashankaraha. The path, that path to Shankara, is where pain turns into pleasure, poison becomes nectar, and the experiences of transmigratory existence, samsara, becomes one of liberation. That path to Shiva is where pain turns into pleasure, poison becomes nectar, and the experience of samsara, rebirth, becomes one of constant liberation. Sri Utpaladeva. And to this we close with Kshamaraja's comment on that. Shankara Marga, Shankaratma Swabhava, Prapi Hetu, Para Shakti Rupa Prasara. The path to Shankara in Utpaladeva's verse refers to the surge that consists of the highest expression of Shakti, felt within the self, through which one's own true being is realized to be Shankara, the one who bestows the highest beautiful realization. Om Shrim Kshemarajasya Namostute Udpaladevasya Namostute Kalatasya Namostute. And to you, great listeners and participants, great Kula, the noble ones, Kulasya Namostute. We give honor. Any questions or comments now, with 2 minutes to go? And for those that must depart, we bid you good night with a bow. And for the rest, you might wish to stay on and see what we might have in store here.
Okay. So there is a question here from David. So it says that you speak of the highest state in which there is no subject nor object. Isn't there in the tantric schools a higher state in which the object is understood or perceived as unique in its particular qualities, but yet consisting solely of Shiva?
Well, David has certainly been around the block with Tantra, so I appreciate the question very much. And I actually alluded to it, but somewhat briefly, and I did it briefly partly because the text will come back and dive into that point deeper. But this is the fourth state of consciousness described earlier, and in your handout on page, let's see, what page? Page 2, I think. No, before that, wait. I forgot where, I just closed it. But the Shiva Sutra quote tells us about the four states of consciousness. So the fourth state, called the fourth state, the Turiya, because no term can describe what it means to have dived into consciousness so deeply, so expansively, that the withdrawal into one's core subjective non-judgmental awareness that simply is the light of consciousness itself expands beyond even that to encompass. Our awareness begins to encompass all of these three phases of prameya, the objective world of thoughts and mind, or objects in general, the act of perceiving them, pramana, and the pure core silent witness, pramatar, all as one ocean. For if pramatar, which is the third state, is to identify my awareness with the calm, peaceful, quiescent depths of, let us say, the ocean. Shiva means quiescent. I have withdrawn my awareness, or rather expanded my awareness beyond contraction into the waves of thoughts or obsessive-compulsive analysis of thoughts, and I've withdrawn in my practice the act of perception into this deep state. But in a third state, I'm still aware of what is called aham idam. I am this. I am only this witness. I am only this witness. I am only this witness. The fourth state is aham, without idam. Idam means that. I am this. I am this self, just pure self with a capital S, without any attributes. But without the idam, aham is just I am. And that is when our awareness is the whole ocean, and not just the quiet depths of it. It becomes expanded to what it really is. Shiva. Shiva is the depths. Shiva is just below the surface. Shiva is the waves. And Shakti is the wind. Shakti is the movement. And so, yes, that is absolutely the case. And so the one that has experienced living liberation is one who can literally allow their awareness to contract into a particular thought or emotion, but not get caught up into it, and indeed transmute that thought or emotion into bliss by inhaling it inward. And this is a mantra practice that the Krama does. So I think it was a yes question, yes, no question, but that's my response for now. More later. Anything else?
Great. Yes, there's one more, and excuse me if I pronounce this incorrectly, but it says, Chris, why
you won't be fired.
do you speak? Huh? Oh, yeah.
I said, be fire, don't worry if it's Sanskrit.
Yeah. You'll know what I mean. When I say it incorrectly, you'll understand. Okay, so why do you speak the words of Kishamarja, but sing the words of Utpala Deva? Did you understand that?
Oh, great question. Yes. Why do I speak the words of Kshamaraja and sing or chant the words of Utpala Deva? Well, I appreciate the easy question at the last minute here. And the answer is because Kshamaraja is writing prose. He's just commenting on the verse. But the quotes of Utpala Deva come from poetry that he's written, which is metrical. And particularly the meter that you've heard is called shloka, which is 16 syllables per line. Da 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 dum da 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 dum da da dum da dum. So that's just the style of writing, the poetic cadence of Utpala's verses. Whereas usually when in fact always, when someone's commenting on a work of poetry like the Spandakarikas, they just speak in regular prose. All right.
Cool. All right. Well, that was wonderful.
And any other questions? Oh, sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say, any other questions or meditations? Because, I realize a lot of stuff flowers forth after we meditate and sit with these teachings. Please remember that we have our Facebook page, and I'll be more active this week than last week on it, and would love to chat with you there. And we'll probably post some juicy little bits this week, so stay tuned.
Okay, thank you, Chris, and hope everyone has a wonderful week. And thank you all very much.
Good night. Good night. Good night, sweethearts.
Good night.